Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, everyone. This is Nick here with What Game Now, and this is the first in a series of videos where we're going to talk about attempting to do better in gaming, specifically with the idea towards miniature games, although you could apply this to pretty much anything. So let's go ahead and get rolling. Before we go too deep, I do want to mention a little bit of information about this video series and some commentary because I know they're going to come up. First off, this is the first in a series of videos. And what these videos are going to do is they're going to cover how to essentially build a better army is what they're titled. It's a little bit of an odd title, but it's the best one I could come up with. And what it's going to cover is how you can, as a player, elevate your gameplay to the next level. Now, this is not with the eye towards competitive play or anything like that. This is just anybody who wants to see if they could do better in game, see if they can get some better results. And this video is going to present that one concept as a bunch of separate pieces. And it's worth noting that you kind of need all of the pieces for all of this to make sense. This is a single cohesive process that gets us from the beginning to the end. But in order to do that, all of these things are going to be occurring simultaneously. But we're going to tackle them one at a time to make sure we can manage and talk about them. I'm going to be game system agnostic here. Essentially, there is no game system we're referring to. We will use various ones as examples, but this works pretty much across the board. And again, I want to emphasize that this isn't necessarily geared towards competitive play. This is just geared towards people who want to try and do a little bit better on the tabletop. Whether you want to limit yourself to a current collection of things you've built around a narrative, or if you're expanding one, well, what do I want to buy next? How do I want to expand my army? So with that in mind, guys, let's go ahead and get going. Our first topic is the idea of a win condition. Now, you may have heard this name before, but I want to talk about it. It goes by a couple different names. Win condition. I've heard winning image a few times. Win con. It's referring to a specific game state, so a specific state of pieces, gaming elements, where they're located, and what they're doing. And this specific game state will be the thing you're trying to achieve, and if you achieve it, you win the game. Basically, I win the game if this happens. So what we're going to try and do is build towards this win condition, identify this win condition, and what you're going to find is it's actually a somewhat fluid thing. Because the win condition is actually based on your army or a deck if you're in a TCG or whatever. It's rooted in the game system. That step one is related to the game system, but the actual win condition is based off of your army. This is how your element that you're working with is going to attempt to win the game. And in order to figure out what this is and how we can use it, we need to do two things. We need to determine what is needed to actually win the game. What specific gameplay elements are used to determine player A wins or player B wins. And also, what things need to happen in order for us to do that? Now, you may think, well, can't we just ask question 2 and it'll make sense why in a moment. Let's start with the first one. Winning the game. This is specifically what in the rules tells you who wins the game. Is it scoring more points than your opponent? I have a picture of a War Machine game right here. This War Machine, you could win by killing your opponent's caster. Is there some other victory condition? These are the things we want to identify, not, oh, I need to control more territory than my opponent, unless that's literally the actual rule. And the reason we care about this is it helps us separate implied things we need to do from the actual things we need to do. It essentially boils it down to the core key things that we need to do to win the game. If this was a game of football, it'd be a matter of who scores the most points in the time frame. The specific things that are used to determine the winner, not how you get there. That's the next thing. This is specifically what's going on. Where can you find this? Well, it's actually just by reading the rulebook. Pull your rulebook open, go to the winning a game section, and say the winner of the game is the player who blank. And it's surprising how many times you'll find things that you think you need to do to win the game that you actually really don't. Let me digress with a short story here. At the end of 5th edition Warhammer, I was having a discussion with a friend, and he made a statement that I very heavily disagreed with. And he said that Warhammer was a game about killing models. I immediately pointed out to him, though, that nowhere in the rules does it say killing models scores you points. You had to kill entire units at that time in the game if you wanted to score points in one of the missions. But the point was, the individual model casualties were meaningless. You could destroy 90% of your opponent's army and score no points. This is the kind of thinking that we're trying to separate right here. What do you need to do to win the game? The next step is the things that are the steps on the path there. This is the end goal. So let's talk about those. This requires a little bit of investigation, and I'm going to mention a few things that I ask and I consider when I'm looking at this. So essentially, the next thing we need to do, now that we know what we need to do to win, what are the things we do in game that move us towards that? If it's we score points by camping on objectives, that's the thing I need to check. It's I score points and I do it by sitting on objectives. I score points by destroying enemy units. I win the game by killing my opponent's warcaster. These are the things we're looking at. The next step, how do we actually acquire the things we need to do to win? And this is going to involve going back to your game, and instead of going to the winning the game section, go to the missions, go to the scenarios or whatever, and read those. What are the things you need to do to actually score those points? And I keep using scoring the points because it's a pretty generic one, and most game systems do use it to an extent. It's also the easiest to imagine. So obviously these questions are not topical in a game that doesn't use points. Okay, there's actually a fair few of those. So what we need to do is we need to look into the game system and ask ourselves a few questions. And the first one I recommend you ask is, what is actually worth points? I score points if I do blank. Destroy enemy units. Hold objectives during a turn or something. These are the kinds of questions we need to ask. A very important question that a lot of people don't ask is also, when do you need to actually, when are they worth points? A good example is in older editions of Warhammer, the objectives only mattered at the end of the game, whereas now they matter on the earlier turns as well. Changes to how you approach the game. If I don't need to be somewhere until turn 6, I don't need to worry about getting there until turn 6. I can be anywhere I want on the other turns so long as I'm there by turn 6. I don't have to go, oh, I need to hold this at the end of the game. I need to go get troops there on turn 1. No, it only matters at the end of the game. Are there any limits on the amount of points scored any one way? So this is games where there's many ways to score points. I'm going to point to 9th edition 40K here as a good example. There are 4 ways to score points in that game. Well, 5. If you count the paint score. But the actual on the table, you have the primary objective and the 3 secondaries. Each one is capped at a certain number of points. This is important because if you look at the game and say, well, when we actually start building our army, we'll be deciding which of these we want to use. If you can say, well, I'm going to go for this primary objective and score all my points there, you're capped at less than half the total. You can't win if you score all of those and your opponent has a better chance of outscoring you. So it's important to understand what our limitations are. If the more things that are limited on how many points we can score, the more other things we're going to have to look at. Heavy Gear is a really good example. All of their objectives are capped at 2 points. So if you have 4 objectives, you have to accomplish all 4 objectives. Whereas in, say, a game like War Machine, there's no limit on the number of points you can score off of any one scenario piece. So you could plan to just say, well, I'm going to score all my points off this scenario piece and stop the rest. It's a different paradigm, and we're going to have to account for these things as we go through army construction. And you start to see why I mentioned these are simultaneous considerations, not one in one. You don't start with the win condition, then do this, then do this. You have to really look at it as a cohesive whole. As we're picking units in our army, what is this going to do to our win condition? Does it enhance our win condition? Does it make us much more readily? If we pick this unit, do we change our win condition? Do we maybe that doesn't gel well with the existing win condition? couple other things. Do you have control over any of these things? And what I'm referring to, not like on the battlefield, well, if I control this objective, I can score lots of points off of it. More in a literal sense. Do you control where these objectives are? Do you control what the objectives are, what they are? Heavy Gear and 9th Edition Warhammer are really good examples for this. Their objective system is you pick, at least in part, in case of Heavy Gear, all of it. That's going to have a huge impact when we better our game. We're going to find that Heavy Gear is going to have a lot more options on army construction because you're in control of what the mission is. How you win the game, these are the things that are building our win condition. If we're in control of that, we have even more power. Instead of catering to something we're presented with, we can build the thing we're catering to. It's going to be very advantageous. And then lastly, we want to do is do some value estimation here. And this requires some experience, and if you want to skip this, that's fine. But we need to estimate what's more valuable, stopping my opponent from scoring or scoring points. Is it important to stop them from doing certain things? Or is it more important to enable me to do things better? Basically, do I want to run faster or do I want to trip my opponent? Which one's more valuable? Ideally, both, but oftentimes with limited resources, you can't. Which one's more advantageous? And we'll talk about these things later on. So before we go, I have a few closing comments. First off, what we're doing here is letting us figure out how we intend to win the game. What are the things we're going to do that are going to result in us winning the game? And it's a single objective. Put that as a separate item, but it really was related to this. It's a single thing that we're trying to do to win the game. And what we're going to be doing going forward is making sure every single decision we make is with this in mind. This is our final goal. If it doesn't help us get here, it's going to be a hard sell. Not impossible, mind you. We'll talk about this. There's a concept called tech later on that will come to this, where there are things that don't feed into your victory condition or your win condition, but come up elsewhere. So we need to really scrutinize what we're doing and making sure it's either helping us win the game or do something along to that, in that vein. I want to reiterate, your army is going to dictate what your win condition is. Your army is built to do one thing, or to do towards this one win condition. But it determines what that win condition is. You can build an army to rely on swarming objectives. You can build an army to rely on killing enemy models. The army is what's going to dictate what's going to try and do to win the game. It's your job to make sure that that lines up with what actually happens to win the game. And that's that second bit right there. The game is dictating what things constitute a win condition. Your army is going to have a natural way it wants to play. You want to make sure that that goes into the win condition at the end. And then lastly, we control our army. We really do. We control our army. Because we control our army, we control what our win condition is. We're the ones who are going to be making the decisions that apply to our win condition. We, as the player, as the general, as the commander, need to make sure that the things we are doing feeds into a valid win condition for the game we're playing. All right, guys, that's going to take us through our first video. I think this is part 1 of 7? Might be 8. We'll see how things go. Definitely at least 7. And with that, guys, have a good one. This has been Nick here with What Game Now, signing off.
Hey, this is Dave. If you like what we're doing here at What Game Now, go ahead and click on one of the videos, which should be on either side of me, or click right in the middle and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell once you subscribe so that you know when we have new videos. Please go ahead and share us with your friends. Let everybody know that we're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for all of our subscribers already. And we look forward to bringing you more content every chance that we get.